Hi, everyone. It is Jaime Jo Wright with Mad Lit Musings, and I'm super excited tonight because I have with us Amanda Wen, who has just come out with a new book. Yay!
Hi.
That was a really excited intro, and then it didn't have a question. So then you're probably like on the other end going, Yay, I don't know what to say. Oh, fun. So this one is called The Rhythm of Fractured Grace, and I'm holding it up. So if people are watching on YouTube, get to see it. It looks like it's glaring a little bit. There we go. This is a cool cover. So I have to tell you something when I saw the cover, and this is really sad because I've helped you do a few graphics and things.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I think 2 weeks ago that I noticed that it was a silhouette of a violin on a
It took
cover.
me a minute to discover that too.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
Kriegel does some really cool, like, imaginative things with their cover design, and, like, my first one, I think one of the linking objects between the contemporary and historical timelines was a diary, and they actually incorporated the diary on the cover, and I didn't notice it until I had looked at the cover about 6 or 7 times, and I
Oh,
was like,
funny.
"Oh, wait, the diary's in there!" So they really do. I mean, I love all of their cover designs. They
Yeah.
just knock it out of the
It's
park.
it's really good because I had just looked at on here you've got like the music
Uh-huh.
sheets. There we go.
Yes.
The music sheets. And so I was constantly focused in on the music.
Uh-huh.
And it took me a while to realize that it created the silhouette of a violin,
Yeah.
which is just super cool. But so anyway, for those who are new to Amanda Wen, tell us a little bit about yourself and this new book and the books that you've written.
Oh, okay. Well, I am a Kansas native. I didn't always live here, but I came back as an adult and I live like 10 minutes from where I grew up.
Nice.
Um, I in my other life, I'm a professional musician.
Hmm.
So I play piano for choirs in a very tiny town about 25 minutes from my house. And I also play cello.
Hmm.
So, and then I decided, hey, I don't have enough crazy things going on in my life. I will write books too. And
Right.
I have 3 kids. 2 of them are teenagers. One of them just got his restricted license.
Oh,
And yeah, like yesterday this happened. We're
oh
still
boy.
wrapping our minds around it. And so,
Yes.
yeah, 2 teenagers and a preteen girl. So my
Wow.
life is never boring.
No, no,
Yeah.
not at all. Not at all. I'm just entering the teenage stage. We have a teenage girl, and then my son is preteen. I will
Uh-huh.
say this, preteen sons so far are easier than the daughter.
Yeah, everybody says that, like, boys are harder when they're little, but easier as teenagers, and girls
Hmm.
are easy when they're little, but watch out when they're teenagers, and she's my youngest, so she just turned 11. I don't know what to expect. I'm
Well,
kind of terrified, but I
right,
work with teenagers, and I have 2 teenagers that live in my house, so I
right.
am as well prepared as a mom can possibly be.
I was gonna say, I don't think you can get much more prepared than that. Either way. And worst case scenario, you just bury yourself in writing another book and
Yeah,
pretend the
my
world
choir
and
kids
reality
are
doesn't
they are
exist.
my guinea pigs. They're like,
Yeah,
okay, I'm going to study this so that when it's time for me to do this for real, I'm like, okay, what worked, what doesn't? And now I
yes.
have a freshman. I have a high school freshman. So
Oh,
like,
high
I've worked with
school.
high school kids for 5 years, and now I have a kid in high school, and I know
Yeah,
how fast it goes. And so it's like,
right. Yeah, you
yeah.
just got 4 more years. Well, really,
Mm,
probably 3.5 now because the school year's
yeah,
half
well, and
over.
he's talking about graduating at semester. So we're
Oh,
down to like less than 3.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's so funny how fast time flies. It really
Mhm.
is. Because you
Yeah.
think about it, I mean, this is your third book coming out, but I really honestly, as a reader, feel like your first one just came out
Yeah,
too.
I sometimes feel that way too.
But it's
Like,
been what, a couple years, if not more?
yeah, my first one launched in 2021.
That's what I thought.
So, and
Okay.
that was, like, right smack in the middle of, like, Delta wave COVID or
Yeah,
whatever,
a
so I didn't
great time to
really
release a book.
yeah, I didn't do a lot of in-person launch things, which was fine because I didn't know what I was doing, so it's like, "Okay, I'll just do all the Zoom things and call it good," and the second one came out in the summer of 2022.
Okay.
And,
Yep.
that one, I mean, I was out of school. I wasn't so I was actually able to focus on that
Right.
launch a
Right.
little bit more. And then this one, like, "Hey, guess what? We're launching in the winter again." And I'm like, "Great, that's busy time for musicians. So sure, it's
Yeah,
fine. It's
yeah,
fine.
exactly, exactly. So, but this is book 3 in
Yes.
a trilogy. Am I correct that it's a
Yes, it
trilogy?
is a trilogy.
Okay.
It's called the Sedgwick County Chronicles.
Okay.
It is set in Sedgwick County, Kansas, which, if you're not familiar with Kansas geography, which most of you probably aren't, Sedgwick County is where Wichita is.
Okay.
Wichita is the largest city in Kansas, which, it's not a big city. It's probably 500,000 or so in the metro area, but by Kansas standards, it's pretty big.
It's
And
big, yeah.
Wichita gets to be the largest city in Kansas because Kansas City, Missouri, like the big part of Kansas City, the
Okay.
famous part of Kansas City, is in Missouri. There's a
Got it.
Kansas City, Kansas
Yes.
too, but it is
Yes.
smaller than Wichita.
Yes.
So, the KC metro area way bigger than Wichita. But since most of it's in Missouri, Wichita
Missouri.
gets the biggest city in Kansas. Yay!
I've actually been to both Kansas cities. I just want to throw it
Oh,
out there.
yes. Good.
So I have been in Kansas. I've been through Kansas, but it's been quite a few years since I have made it down your
Yeah.
way.
I think the best thing about living in Kansas is that you don't ever have to drive across all of it in one go. Like
Right?
you get to stop at some point. I feel sorry
Kansas,
for all the
yeah,
people that like drive from Kansas City to Denver and they have to drive across
done
like
it.
6.5 hours of
Done it.
I-70. And I'm like, there's
Yep.
nothing.
Yep. I think that was the last time I went through Kansas was when I was going out to the Denver area and then Gunnison, Colorado, and some of those
Uh-huh.
places out there. So, yeah, I remember Kansas just going on and on
Yep.
and
Mhm.
on. And there was no yellow brick road. I'm sorry.
No, there's not. It's entirely fictional. We don't have a yellow brick road.
No.
I mean, I think there is a yellow brick road at our local botanical garden in like the children's part. Like
Oh,
they
I'm
have
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not really, and it
Yes.
doesn't whisk you away to Oz. And
Darn.
but I think I'm a little fuzzy on Wizard of Oz, but I think did Dorothy get picked up by a tornado to go to
Mm-hmm.
Oz? Like maybe
Mm-hmm.
we don't really want that to happen.
No, no, and the Wicked Witch of the West and all of that. And
Yeah.
yeah. But, anyway, we don't need to get off on the Wizard of Oz. But I will say this. I have heard, and I have not read it, but I've heard that the book is even more devious than the show or
Hmm.
the movie, which is terrifying in and of itself because of the flying monkeys.
Uh-huh.
Just throw that out there.
Yeah. Well, if
I,
something scares you, then
well, the flying monkeys traumatized me as a child.
yeah,
I am not going to
okay.
lie. They
Yeah.
did. They did. But we don't have flying monkeys
No,
in
no
the
flying
rhythm of
monkeys
fractured
and fractured grace. No,
grace.
no flying monkeys.
So tell us a little bit about the story before we get way off on a tangent here.
The story, it's another dual timeline. So all of my books are split time.
Hmm.
This one, the present timeline, deals with a violin repair person. The technical term for that is luthier.
Hmm.
Her name is Siobhan, and she is a survivor of church abuse. It's like a church to me too kind of story.
Hmm.
And the past timeline deals with a woman named Deborah who survived being scalped.
Okay.
And those two women, the theme of the book is forgiving the seemingly unforgivable,
Hmm.
because both of them are going to be confronted with the evil that others did to them.
Yeah.
And both of them are going to wrestle with the command from scripture that we need to forgive those who wrong us because of how, even the worst evil that has been done to us, we basically did the same thing to God and he forgave
Mm.
us.
Yeah.
And it's the power of Christ in us that enables us to
Mm.
forgive those. I mean,
Right.
you can't do it. I've tried to do it on my own, and you
Right.
can't. It has to be God working in you, and God
Hmm.
works in the lives of these two women. And sometimes when I was writing this book, I honestly just kind of felt like a spectator, like, oh,
Mm.
okay, oh, this is
Interesting.
happening. Oh, okay, well, I have to kind of keep up with that. And
Yeah,
yeah, it was fun.
that makes sense. I've been there myself where the story just kind of takes you away and you're like, where's this going?
Uh-huh.
Like, I didn't know we were going in this direction, but let's go. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, okay, characters.
Okay, so you have two really tough topics though that you're
Yeah,
discussing. I mean, obviously they center around the theme of forgiveness. But these aren't small things to forgive either. So
no.
let's talk about the historical time period first. We have
Mhm.
somebody that you mentioned survived a scalping. So I know that was based out of a real historical
Yes,
um, saga or
it
what the word
was.
is, story.
Yeah. This is inspired by an event that took place in the 1780s in like when Pennsylvania was the frontier.
Okay. Yep.
This was in, I think, 1782. And it was a family, the preacher and his wife and kids were walking to church. And he thought his wife had his Bible. And the wife's like, no, I thought you had it. And so he went back home to get his
Oh,
Bible. And while he was gone, a bunch of indigenous warriors attacked his family.
Okay.
Um, his wife and three of his kids were killed, and then his two daughters were attacked and scalped, but both of them survived to
Wow.
adulthood, actually.
Wow.
And it's known as the Corbley family massacre.
Okay.
There's a monument to it. There's descendants of this pastor John Corbley. They get together. They have a reunion every
Interesting.
June, and I am a descendant of these people.
Oh,
Yeah, the older of the two girls, Delilah Corbley, is
okay.
my six times great grandmother.
Wow.
So I learned this story through my mom's genealogical research. So
Wow.
I grew up knowing that I descended from a woman who survived being scalped, and I just thought that that was like the most incredible thing. And so when I started writing books and incorporating my own family history, I knew I wanted to write a book inspired by her, and that ended up being this one.
Yeah. Wow. What a topic, too. Holy
Yeah.
smokes. And then you think about it being real and having someone who survived such trauma, physically,
Mhm.
emotionally, and mentally, really.
Yeah.
And then if they had not survived, we would not be having this podcast right now.
Right. Nope.
I
I wouldn't
mean,
be here.
that's crazy.
Yeah, which is, you just think about how God protected her,
Yeah.
and he had countless reasons for protecting her, but one of
Hmm.
the reasons was so that my family could be here,
Right.
and
Right.
that I could be here, and my kids could be here, and their kids, and on and on and on and on, and
Hmm.
however long we have,
Right.
it's really
Right.
mind-boggling to think about.
That is really mind-boggling. And so then you took that concept and you
Uh-huh.
put it into fictional form, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay.
Some of the names are real, but I've changed spellings.
Hmm.
I changed the real historical woman was Delilah Corbley, but I thought it would be weird to write a Christian fiction book with a main character named Delilah, so I
Delilah.
changed her name to Deborah.
Okay.
Um,
It's fair.
yeah, so the fictional version of her is named Deborah, but a lot of the details I did. The one biggest change that I made was I moved this story from Pennsylvania to Kansas.
Okay.
um, I originally was going to set it in 1780s Pennsylvania, and I was kind of wondering, like, how in the world am I going to tie this in with Sedgwick County?
Hmm.
And then I was starting to research scalping survivors because there have been a few over the
Yeah.
years, and there was one guy in Kansas who survived being scalped by, I think, Sioux
Okay.
Native Americans in um, 1860 something. And
Okay.
I was like, okay, there's historical
Hmm.
precedent. I
Hmm.
can move this story to Kansas and write another pioneer story. And in so doing, I was able to bring some of my past characters from my first book into the
Yeah.
third one.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
some of the people, if you have read any of my books and you really liked Jack and Annabelle, you will see them again in book three.
In book three. Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome. So we
that's
do
what
have
I
some.
called it. The whole time I was writing, I never had a working title. I was just like, you
Oh,
know what? Kriegel knocks my titles out of the park. I'm not even going to try. It's been book three. Like
book
in my
three.
head, the whole time I was
All
writing,
right.
it's book three. And I still call it book three. Like it has a fantastic title,
Right.
but I still call it book three.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Okay, so you know what's interesting? It's a little bit of a side note, but it's interesting because for some reason, and I can't remember why, but I had done some research on the history of scalping.
Mhm.
And without getting into the gruesome details, that's
Yeah.
probably why I was studying it for something gruesome in my books. But I was really im impressed is the wrong word.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of a different word. I was
Yeah.
really impressed with the fact that it's so synonymous with indigenous culture, and
Mhm.
yet it happened between white culture during the Civil War battles. There was
Mhm.
scalping during some of the Civil War
Yeah.
battles, and Europeans practiced that in many ways, in many forms. Like
Yeah.
if you look at it internationally, scalping is not synonymous with one ethnicity. It's really interesting. I was like, "Oh,
Mhm.
this is interesting. I did not realize
Yeah.
that."
Well, and the interesting part is that my ancestor Delilah, her sister
Mhm.
Elizabeth, always insisted that she was scalped by a white man.
Interesting.
Yeah, she like until the day she died, she's like it was a white guy, and so it was like okay, and that found its way into the
Did
book
that
too.
find its way into the book?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't think history is as clear cut as we have made it.
no,
And you even look at, I mean, you look at the Boston Tea Party and how white men dressed up as Native Americans
Mm,
for the Boston Tea Party. And you never know what really was happening behind the scenes in that real life
yeah.
story.
Now, and history is told by the quote unquote winners, so you
Hmm.
don't
Right.
always get an accurate picture.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, I can guarantee you if some of the wars had ended differently, we'd have a very different history book
Yes, we would.
that would make Americans really, really bad in certain
Yeah,
situations. And we probably were in certain situations too. So,
yeah, we were, but
yeah. It's never, war of any kind is never black and white,
no, it's not.
and that's just one of the things I found. So you've tackled a pretty dynamic topic in a very intense period of history of our own.
Uh-huh.
Um, how did you bring about the concepts of forgiveness within Deborah's story without giving away too many spoilers?
Yeah. Deborah, when we open this story, Deborah, she has an ongoing rivalry with her sister Elizabeth, who also she is the one person that Deborah knows who also survived this attack. And so they
Okay.
are bonded by this incredibly traumatic thing. They both have the same scars, but
Hmm.
Elizabeth has handled it I, differently than Deborah has.
Okay.
Deborah's pretty bitter about it still.
Okay.
Elizabeth just seems like Deborah's always jealous of Elizabeth. Like Elizabeth, she thinks Elizabeth's prettier. Elizabeth's getting married, and Deborah
Hmm.
wants to, and nobody's interested in her. And even with her scars,
Mm,
Elizabeth has somebody fall in love with her. And so what's wrong with me that I don't? And Elizabeth
right.
is so happy all the time, and she seems to have moved past this tragedy just fine. Why am I still wrestling with it? And their dad won't talk about it. And so she feels she has someone like this family has all been through something awful, and
Hmm.
yet Deborah feels kind of isolated and alone because it's like, well, everybody else seems to have moved past it. What's wrong with me? Why can't
Mm,
I?
hmm.
And part of that is the forgiveness aspect.
Right. Right. And how do you get the point of forgiving such an egregious act?
Yeah.
And then you move us into a contemporary setting
Uh-huh.
where you have another character going through another forgiving situation. Now, what's her name again? Because I can't
Her name
pronounce.
is Siobhan, which
Siobhan. Okay.
I mean, when I originally conceived of this book, it was as book one of another series.
Okay.
So this was originally not tied in with Sedgwick County Chronicles at all. My
Okay.
agent, I have a book that went out on submission, it did not sell. My agent was like, "You need a sequel," and I kind of just threw an idea out there, like, "Well,
Okay.
I'll figure it out." Okay, so that was the book that didn't sell. The book that did sell, I knew, okay, she's going to want me to come up with a sequel. So I did. So Roots of Wood and Stone and The Songs That Could Have Been. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, here are my two books. And my agent
Right.
said, cool, do you have a book three? And I was like, oh,
Mm,
only idea I had was this book, which was, I
okay.
originally had thought of it as book one for a whole different series.
Okay.
And I was like, well, I can probably tie this together with the contemporary storyline if I make the heroines related somehow, like just
Okay.
having
Hmm.
as part of a family. And I had a throwaway mention of a relative of my heroine in book three. And I
Okay.
just threw out the name Siobhan because I had heard it. I thought it was cool. It's
Yeah.
Irish.
Yeah.
It's a cool name.
It is.
Then I realized that means that the heroine of book three is going to have a weird name that nobody knows how to pronounce. So
Well,
I
when you
cleared
pronounce
up.
it,
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you pronounce it, it's fine, Siobhan. But when you
yeah,
see it on paper, we're not used to that. What is it, Celtic or
yeah. I
Irish?
think
Same
Gaelic
thing.
or
I don't know.
something.
Gaelic.
Yeah,
Gaelic. That's probably what it is.
yeah.
Celtic is probably Scottish, and I probably have all the Irish up in arms now at me. I'm sorry.
No, well,
Uh,
I'm not. I'm both, so it doesn't matter.
don't say Celtic. It's Gaelic. Anyway, it's a beautiful spelling. It's Siobhan, but it's pronounced Siobhan.
Yeah.
Correct?
Mhm.
Okay. I like that. That's cool. So what was her situation? She was not obviously scalped, but she
No,
has
her
experienced
scars
revenge.
are all internal.
Okay.
She worked at a church, and the pastor, she got into an abusive relationship with the
Mm,
pastor, and she had no idea that it was a one of those church two type things where she thought
yep.
it was the consent, and is
Mm-hmm.
there consent, and blah
Mm-hmm.
blah blah,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a sticky situation, and she blames herself.
Okay.
But through the course of it, when you are abused, it's not your fault. When someone
Right.
manipulates you, when someone
Right.
gaslights you, when someone lies to you, it is
Right.
not your fault
Mm-mm.
because you are falling into a web that you have absolutely no idea is even being spun, and you don't realize you're there until you're
Right.
trapped.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a real manipulation
Mhm.
abuse,
Yeah.
especially that type of an abusive situation. I mean, in the you look at the situation of your historical heroine, and that's kind of an obvious
Yeah.
this was not good. But all those things that take place where it can be twisted and warped into either it's your fault or you were really part of this or you
Yeah, you
kind
were
of
too
played into
beautiful,
it.
tempting, that's what the
Right.
pastor says to her.
Yeah. Yeah. And that unfortunately has been prevalent within the church
Yeah.
for years as well. So
Mhm.
so you have two women who have experienced different forms of abuse. They're both coming through the journey to forgiveness. Um, Last question is a loaded one. It's one thing to forgive somebody for a little white lie, and it's another thing to forgive somebody for maybe not returning the $50 that you lent them that they said they'd return and they never do. It's an entirely different level when you're talking about an abuse situation. So, what type of research and what did you find um, helped you bring these characters to resolution in their journeys?
Well, I think the biggest thing to remember is that forgiveness does not necessarily mean restoration of relationship. It does not mean everything goes back to the way it was. It does
Mm-hmm.
not mean they didn't hurt you. It does not
Right.
mean, all of these feelings that you have are incredibly valid and real. And, I have struggled. Ironically, while I was writing this book, I had a toxic friendship that
Mm,
was equally manipulative and gaslighting, and I didn't realize it either.
mm,
And so I think on some level I must have known because I was able to write this
yeah.
narcissistic
Uh-huh.
character. Like, when I found out the truth about my friend, it was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I was in a situation where, okay,
Mm-hmm.
you have to forgive this. And, I realized I can forgive this person, but that does not mean that I, let my guard down again, that I
Right.
trust them again, that
Right.
because, and it depends too, like the requirement to forgive does not depend on whether the other person is repentant.
Right.
And in this story, we have one villain who is repentant and one who's not.
Mm, okay.
But so I did that on purpose. I wanted to
Right.
contrast because it
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't matter. Like, if the person is repentant and there is a mutual desire for restoration of a relationship, or whatever, in this situation, I don't want to spoil the book. So I'm not going to
Right.
go,
Right.
I'll kind of reel that back. But like, if you have somebody who is, repentant, they've
Mm-hmm.
changed behavior, whatever, then if there's a mutual desire, if it's healthy for both
Mm-hmm.
people to restore the relationship, then, great.
Right.
But if the other person doesn't think they did anything wrong, or, yeah, I did do something wrong and I'll do it again too. Well, okay, then
Mm-hmm.
for your own mental health, sanity, protection, whatever. You don't restore relationship
Right.
with that person, but that does not mean that you hold on to the bitterness and the anger. And
Right.
I think
Right.
the most powerful illustration of forgiveness that I can remember was when I was probably in middle school, and our church did a sermon about forgiveness. And when we walked into the sanctuary, ushers handed us all links of really heavy chain,
Hmm.
just little chunks of a chain, and we had no idea what that was about.
Sure.
And like, we just held this during the sermon, and at the very end of the sermon the pastor said, unforgiveness keeps you chained to the other person. It does not
Mm,
punish the other person. It doesn't hurt them. It hurts you. You are the one in chains. And so then they passed around metal coffee cans.
mm,
They're like, if you have something that you, and it wasn't even that you're ready to forgive, it's just you want to start the process, because
mm-hmm.
it is a process,
Yeah.
especially like with egregious abuse. You can't just go, oh, okay, I forgive you. It's not, no,
Right.
it comes in layers. It's a cycle. You have to do a lot of work. But like,
Yes.
they're like, if you know that you need to forgive someone, and if you want to start the process, put the chain in the coffee can. And,
Mm.
it's a big church, and just the sound of those metal chains hitting the coffee
Yeah.
can, you know, like, oh, these are things that are being forgiven,
Wow.
journeys
Yeah.
that are being started, is just like mind blowing. So,
Right, right. Yeah. Well, and I think for me too, when you think about that concept of forgiveness, I've always gotten it mixed up with the concept of if I forgive them, then I'm essentially erasing what happened.
mhm.
And that's not true.
No,
And that's taken me a long time to get past that concept of no, forgiveness isn't an erasing of what happened and a going off, tiptoe through the tulips type of a situation.
right.
It's recognizing that being bitter is going to sour your own relationships with others and the Lord, like you were just saying. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and the okay, we might have to edit this out. I don't
that's
know.
fine.
Because I had a really good idea and then I just kind of
Because I
completely
started talking.
blank on it. No, no, it's fine. Here's what it was. When you trust God with the wounds that have been dealt, I mean, one of the things that I have to remember is that nothing gets to you
Hmm.
without going through God's filter. Like he does
Right.
not allow anything to happen to you that isn't part of his plan. And it sucks when you're in the middle of it. I mean, it's that I don't want to sound like one of those trite people like all things happen for a reason. No, but as I have walked through my own journey of forgiving
Hmm.
abuse, God uses that. Like
Yeah.
he patches up the cracks but shines his light through them. It's like
Hmm.
he will take anything and everything, and that's what I hope that this book communicates to readers is
Yeah.
that these horrible things that happened, God still redeemed them and restored them and used them
Hmm.
for good.
Yeah. Nothing's wasted.
No, nothing is.
Nothing is wasted. Well, Amanda, this is great. Thank you so much for being with us today. This was
You.
a heavy topic to handle
Yeah, yeah. I'm
after a
actually
long day
not
at work.
really a heavy person. If you know me in person, I'm kind of like I'm fairly lighthearted and
As I say, you're pretty light and bubbly, but I love the fact
yeah.
that you're willing to tackle some of these things and some of the historical issues and the church issues and things like that that are a little bit scary to tackle as an author. And so
Mhm.
kudos to you for doing it sensitively and carefully.
Thank
And
you.
for
And
readers
kudos to
who,
Pringle for trusting me. It was
yes,
like, "You're gonna write what? Okay.
go
Okay, go for it."
for it. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, everybody can read this book with grace, but I think they can also read it with the understanding that these are difficult themes. They aren't
Yeah, they
supposed to
are.
be easy, cookie cutter, easy
Mhm.
topics to wrestle through. And
There aren't easy answers.
there aren't. No, no, they're
No.
not. And that's the world that we live in. And so we need to learn how to journey through that gracefully and with forgiveness. So
Mhm.
if readers want to find out more about you, where do they go?
My website is amandawen.com. You can sign up for my newsletter. There's links to my social media. Just everything kind of funnels through that website.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's
And then
not.
there's a
It's not
free novella, isn't there, if they sign up?
yes, there is. Yep,
All
there's
right.
a free Valentine's Day themed novella that I
Well,
wrote like
see,
5 years ago.
that's perfect time of year though for that. So
It is.
there we go. Awesome. All right. Well, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for being with us,
Thank you,
and we'll
Jamie.
do it again.
Yes.